All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's call. I'm super excited to have you all here. And thank you, Spencer, for helping to moderate today's call. Welcome, everyone, to the National LGBTQ plus Moral March Mobilization call. We're super excited to have you. My name is Tyrone Hanley. I'm Director of Racial and Economic Justice Initiatives at the National Center for Lesbian Rights. I also have the privilege of serving as a leader of the National LGBTQ Anti-Poverty Action Network, which is hosting today's event. The network is a group of over 100 LGBTQ and anti-poverty and anti-hunger organizations and advocates who want to address the needs of low-income LGBTQ people. And we do that through research, public education, and also advocacy. So we're hosting today's call, and we're really honored to join our colleagues from the Poor People's Campaign to really start the process of mobilizing LGBTQ people for the Moral March in Washington, D.C. on June 18th. And so the reason why we are marching and mobilizing is because we know that poverty is an LGBTQ issue. Despite the stereotypes of our community is actually more likely to be living in poverty, more likely to be relying on social safety net programs. So this is an issue, while it's definitely something that many of our folks are grappling with on a day-to-day basis, that doesn't tend to get the same type of recognition, not only from our movement, but honestly from anti-poverty, anti-hunger movements. And so we're just really honored to be able to, take this opportunity to really elevate that this is a reality that so many of our people are experiencing. And we also know that our community, is constantly used as a distraction to avoid the fact that so many politicians would rather side on corporate and the interests of the wealthy than people who are just struggling to get by. And so we think it's really important that we make it clear that our community not only recognize that poverty is something that impacting our community, but it's impacting people of all genders and sexualities, and that we want to be an integral part of ending poverty, not only in our country, but hopefully in the entire world. So I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleagues, Noam and Shally from the Poor People's Campaign to talk about the march. And then after that, Spencer is we're going to talk a little bit about like how you can get involved. And then Spencer is going to facilitate a Q&A for us so that you can get your questions answered. So I will turn it over to Shally and Noam for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tyrone, Spencer, everyone who's on this call today, and all the communities that you're bringing with you. My name is Shally Gupta-Barnes. I'm the Policy Director of the Poor People's Campaign and the Kairos Center, which is one of the two national organizations of the campaign. And we had kind of three things we wanted to share with you all today. One was a history, for those who aren't familiar, of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and how we got to this assessment. Two was some findings briefly on a recent report that we put out on the pandemic, where we saw that really this has been after the first phase of poor people's pandemic, which some of you may know very well. And then finally, why that means, how that has kind of encouraged us to organize even more deliberately and fastidiously towards June 18th. So I'm just going to get started. We have some slides to share with you. I hope there's not a lot of text or anything. It's mainly images, so and a short video that we'll get to as well. But Noam, are you able to pull up those slides when you have a second? Perfect. Great. So sorry. Okay. So the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, was launched in 2017, where we had a national tour, and through that tour we started organizing towards 40 days of moral action, 6 weeks of moral action that coincided with the 50th anniversary of the historic 1968 Poor People's Campaign that was led by Reverend Dr. King, and many other poor people, organizations of poor people and leaders of poor people's organizations, including civil rights leaders, clergy, and other folks who were coming together to recognize that poverty, systemic racism, and militarism were the key injustices of their times. So we were organizing this 50 years later around those injustices, but taking up that mantle of the 1968 campaign, but around the conditions we were facing in this country. And we have a series of maps that show how we built this analysis around systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and then the false narrative of Christian nationalism, which ideologically kind of blames and shames the poor rather than the systemic and root causes of poverty and these other injustices. So what we saw as we were going across the country and putting together the experiences of varied communities, but then also connecting, looking at what had happened over the past 50 years since that 1968 campaign, we saw that since 2010, there had been this proliferation of voter suppression laws across the country. So this was the first kind of layer of what we were looking at. This was updated. The voter suppression map was updated to reflect what happened last year when 19 states also passed voter suppression laws. But we've seen this expansion of voter suppression over the past decade and more. And then we started asking additional questions like, well, what else is related to voter suppression? We looked at the lack of Medicaid expansion. Now, some of these states are a little bit different now, but you could see that some of the same states that passed, sorry, Noam, I feel like you're a slide ahead of me. Okay, thank you. Some of the same states that passed voter suppression laws were also not expanding Medicaid, not expanding, not providing healthcare to poor and low-income people. And then we kept looking and digging, and we saw that many of these same states also lacked LGBTQ non-discrimination laws. So you see, a lot of this analysis came out of our experiences in North Carolina, which was at that point a non-expansion state that was passing laws against LGBTQ folks and passing voter suppression laws all at the same time. And we started to see this pattern across the country. This next map shows that we also saw that these darker areas show census tracts that are at risk of losing their access to water because it's too expensive. So we started to see these patterns emerge across the South, across parts of the Midwest. This next map shows military installations in the US and also Superfund sites. So the relationship between violence, that's carried out through war and climate, destruction of our environments. The darker the color, the bigger the dots, the more of this pollution and military activity we have. And through this, through all of these maps and this assessment across these 5 injustices, we realize that there are 140 million poor and low-income people in this nation who, as you can see in these numbers in the corner, are of every race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation in the country. And as Tyrone mentioned, overrepresented among LGBTQ people and communities. And what this map shows is poor and low-income people are not only in every state in the country, as we've learned recently, they're actually in every county in the nation. Every county in the country has between 8 and 94% of its population that is poor or one emergency away from being poor. And so this is all, this is kind of the stages of what it took for us to realize the breadth of these systemic and interlocking injustices, and why it was that we had to organize a national campaign that was actually rooted very deeply in communities and in local leadership across the country. And so we have a short video that expresses that where you can see some of the leaders that are taking up this campaign, some of the state leaders in the Poor People's Campaign that have been part of this campaign for some of them from its beginning in 2018, some of them more recent, but it's important for you all to see some of the leaders that this campaign is bringing together across the country.
21 years in the coal mines. I have black lung. And it's just unfathomable what these poor coal miners have to go through in order to get what they have worked for and deserve.
At one time, poverty was a temporary condition. You were on a down slope for a minute, but you could bounce back up. We can't bounce back up today. It's permanent. We're not going back to the factory and building cars and trucks like we once did.
A job working at McDonald's or the grocery store doesn't pay enough for one person to live.
We work a 40-hour work week, still not enough. Living from paycheck to paycheck. Rent is $600 a month. We got water bill, electricity. I do this for my kids, and it hurts.
I'm 46 years old. I've lived in poverty here in West Virginia every day of my life. And I'm working. I am a working poor with a bachelor's degree. I'm doing the best I can with what I have.
We were in the height of mass water shutoffs. This entire neighborhood was shut off all at one time.
I saw all of my neighbors get shut off right in front of me. It was kind of terrifying. I'm 42 years old and I'm a cashier at McDonald's. I had lost my house. You're welcome to come inside. There's a lot of people that are living in their cars. You never notice until you're in the same situation.
I have stuff to give my children. I'm paying all these bills and they need school clothes and stuff. They be asking me for, I can't get to them.
Now I'm a Kansas farmer's wife. Kansas farmers are committing suicide. Why? They're usually in debt up to their eyeballs.
I see poverty in my own community. You know, there's a 70% unemployment rate in the reservation right now.
Here in New York City, we're home to millionaires and billionaires, and we have so many people living in the street, and that's just not right.
I've been a homeless veteran twice, lived in a shelter.
I've been living down here since I was 17.
My only chance of going to college was joining the Army. We are demanding that we stop the war on our poor.
700,000 people in this country are on the verge of losing their food stamps.
This budget calls for shrinking the social safety net programs like Medicare.
I just know that everything that's happening to us isn't right.
I'm in stage 5 of kidney disease. I fell behind on my health care and they canceled my health insurance. And they told me I have to wait until open enrollment. There's only 5 stages of kidney disease and I'm in the 5th stage. And murder, it's murder. You know, if you ask me, it's murder.
I lost a son, sperm balance. And I lost a daughter. No parent should have, in America, should have to bury their child for lack of medicated space. I'm willing because my children
My God.
are no more.
My God. My God, Kevin.
I'm willing, y'all. I'm willing. Because my babies ain't no more. How many more babies? How many more children?
No more.
I want you to know that when hands that once picked cotton join hands of Latinos, join hands of progressive whites, join faith hands and labor hands and Asian hands and Native American hands and poor hands and wealthy hands with a conscience and gay hands and straight hands and trans hands and Christian hands and Jewish hands and Muslim hands and Hindu hands and Buddhist hands, when we all get together, we are an instrument of redemption. When we join hands, we can revive and make sure that the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and equal protection under the law is never taken away from anybody. So I got a question. Are the rejected ready to revive and declare that this land is your land, this land is my land, this land is our land, and together from the State House to the White House, the rejected are going to demand that this nation never give up on being one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So a lot of those, that last gathering was in 2019. It was a Congress that we had that had delegates from all across the country. And we had been planning, for another gathering, this March in Assembly in 2020, but obviously had to shift all of that over. And so we're returning to those plans now 2 years into the pandemic, more than 2 years into the pandemic. And it's pretty devastating to know that many of the conditions that we faced before the pandemic in the early years of this campaign have become worse. Some of them have been revealed, some of them have not. And so I'll speak very quickly to this new report that we put out, the Poor People's Pandemic Report, which we looked at county level data across the country, and we found that overall the death rates, COVID-19 death rates, have been twice as high in poorer counties than they have been in richer counties. This one chart just shows, the yellow line at the top is the number. It tracks the deaths, the COVID death rate for low income communities. The blue line is for high income communities, and you could see that after every phase past that first phase, low income communities suffered many times more the deaths, going up to 3, 4, even 5 times as high the death rate at different phases of the pandemic. And so, one of the things that, and there are racial disproportionalities through this as well that we should get into. When we looked at the 300 counties with the highest death rates, 45% or more of the population was poor, right? And so, and many of them are in rural counties, which don't get reported on in the same way because they haven't kind of met the threshold. The CDC will report racial demographics of counties that have had more than 100 deaths. But small rural counties like Galax, Virginia, for instance, which has had fewer than 100 deaths, has a higher death rate than the Bronx. And so, we have to be able to put a county like Galax next to the Bronx and to see what the commonalities are there. And one of the commonalities is poverty. It's not having access to the things we need to survive, let alone thrive. And so, this report called out something that we have known for a very long time, that 40% of this nation is poor, across race, across gender, across sexual orientation, across again every single place in this country. And it's a consequence of the fact that we hide and shame and blame the poor rather than the systemic causes of this poverty. So it is our responsibility to change these narratives around these injustices, to tell this truth and to break the isolation of people who've been experiencing this for far too long, to bring them into relationship with each other, for us to be in deeper relationship with each other and millions of others, to build the power of poor and dispossessed people in every place we can realize the nation we have yet to be. So this is the vision we have for this massive gathering in June, on June 18th. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Noam to share more about that.
Thanks, Shally. It's really good to be on this call with everyone. I am the Director of Partnerships with the Poor People's Campaign, use he, him pronouns, and Colin from Philly. Yeah, it's good to see some from familiar names, and some folks have yet to meet. Jordan, my family is an old collage family, so maybe we could connect about that sometime. But I have the unfortunate responsibility of following up Shally, but I suppose maybe the fortunate responsibility of just keeping to the logistics and the plan for June, and appreciate Shally kind of laying out the vision and history for the campaign, and kind of taking all of that history. I think we in the Poor People's Campaign have just been looking at the conditions we're confronting now and asking the question, I think, which is on everyone's mind, is what is it going to take to actually force a change in this country at a really big level? I mean, we know that we need to be fighting at the local level and at the state level. The Poor People's Campaign is doing that in 40 plus states. You all are doing that in your contexts. Many folks here are doing national, work too, and all of it feeds into one another, but really thinking about what will it take to really build the kind of political will to actually force this country to face itself and the conditions that are really at the heart of the experience of millions of people, and actually enact a moral agenda that can actually lift up the 140 million poor and low-income people in this country, and those others who are directly impacted. So our proposal, in many ways for ourselves and for the nation, is really that we need to have a mass mobilization. We need to actually really come together in a new way in this moment, this pandemic moment, to really forcefully and visibly and muscularly sort of assert the power of our communities in a fusion way, in a unified way that can break ourselves sort of out of some of the silos we often find ourselves caught in, and actually make the connections that Shally and Tyrone were agitating us to make. So that's what we're doing on June 18th. We'll be gathering many, many thousands of people from every state in the country, from other parts of North America, and likely the world as well. We're really hoping that this can be one of the largest gatherings of poor and low income people and of low wage workers in recent US history, but then also that all other folks of moral conscience who are concerned about the direction our country is headed in. So that's what we're planning on June 18th, Saturday in Washington, DC. We'll be gathering at 9 a.m. We'll be marching and rallying at 10 a.m. on Pennsylvania Ave, right in front of the US Capitol. We have, at this point, truly hundreds of people waking up every day thinking about how to organize their communities towards DC on June. We have a ton of really extraordinary partner organizations coming into the fold, including working closely with Spencer and Tyrone and this larger network to think about bringing your organizations into this mobilization, but major labor unions coming on board, very grassroots, local, state-based and national organizations that do work on all manner, of issues, from climate and environment to racial justice, to economic justice, to voting rights and democracy, to LGBTQ plus issues. The whole, spectrum, as well as faith and religious communities and those who are not of faith. So that's just what the kind of coalition that's coming together around this mobilization looks like. And I think maybe my task is just to raise a few things that we're asking, of folks as we, invite you to consider joining us in this, and also maybe just share a couple resources before I pass it on to Spencer. So I think, the big thing is we would really love to invite everyone on this call, as well as the organizations that you all work with day in and day out, to consider joining us as a mobilizing partner for June 18th. The ask is right in the name. It's to mobilize, a delegation of your people to come to Washington, DC with us on the day. So I'm going to just share in the chat, and perhaps afterwards we can follow up by email as well, this link, which is a form that folks can fill out to express, your commitment and interest to joining as a mobilizing partner. Heidi, I see your question. Yes, definitely. Teachers are getting into the mix. Unions of educators are getting into the mix. And if you have other thoughts, we should definitely connect. I think we would really love to, as well as student groups as well in universities. And I'll put my contact in the chat at the end of this. And so people are really invited to reach out with ideas and questions. But yeah, that's the first piece, is just, please check out that form. Consider filling it out yourself, and spread it around to your network, and encourage and recruit others to join in this effort. And then the other thing that I just wanted to share briefly is the landing page for the mobilization, with just a few resources just for folks to have in their mind. This is, and I'll put the link to it in the chat, but just a few things real quick. One is there's an RSVP button that we're just encouraging individuals to RSVP for this. So if you have members, people who are interested in getting involved, just send them here, ask them to fill out this form. It's a really simple, quick, 15-second form to fill out. We've got some resources folks can use, social media toolkit that you can see here, an organizing manual, just different resources we're putting in folks' hands as they're thinking about how to spread the word and get it out far and wide. This button takes you to that form I was just mentioning. And then the last thing I just wanted to put on folks' radar is that we're working with a company called Rally, which maybe is familiar to some of y'all, but it's a company that actually emerged out of a need that mass mobilizations of this kind identified to have a kind of coordinated way of having buses kind of coming in from all over the country. So if you go to the rally website, which you can click on here, you'll see that there are about 300 plus locations currently on the rally map of potential bus routes that will be traveling as far as California and as close as Richmond, Virginia, to Washington, DC. Folks can register onto those buses. They can buy individual seats. Organizations can buy multiple seats. You could book an entire bus if you had that many people. And it's one way of getting folks a resource to get to DC. It's not the only. Folks will be taking buses. We've heard of people flying. We've heard of people car caravanning. I swear we've heard of people walking. People are really coming up with creative solutions to bring their communities, many of whom are poor and low income, who have sparse resources, but are really committed to making this mobilization the kind of mobilization we need it to be. So are thinking really critically about how to bring their people to DC. So that's, I think, what I had to tell you all on the agenda. Spencer, maybe I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you both, Shally and Noam, for sharing all of this really great information, and also for updating us about the Moral March and ways that folks get involved. I am here to help facilitate our Q&A section. So if folks do have questions, you're welcome to put those either into the chat and I can read those out. You can also raise your hand or unmute yourself so that you can ask your questions live. So yeah, if you have any questions about the Poor People's Campaign or about the Moral March, or also how you can work with Tyrone and myself in organizing a LGBTQ delegation for this march, yeah, please, feel free to chime in now. Ames.
So I know at least one LGBT faith group that's coming from North Carolina. Is there a way to connect with other LGBTQ groups that are coming to the march, like to rendezvous on the day?
Tyrone, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. Well, first of all, that's really exciting to hear, Ames. So as Spencer just briefly mentioned, we are actually trying to organize an LGBTQ delegation so that we can have a very beautiful visual representation that queer and trans people are showing up strong at the march. And so one of the things that we're going to follow up this call with is a link so that you can sign up for an email list to stay in communication with us as we prepare for the march, as well as if you want to join us for calls leading up to the march as well to help plan and coordinate as well. So there definitely will be an effort to bring us all together at the march. Thank you for that question.
Thanks, James. And Julia?
Thank you. Hey, Julia from Wyoming, also with the Nonviolent Medicaid Army. And so we have a small and mighty crew organizing the poor out here in Wyoming. And we aren't officially affiliated with any organization with, well, really, we're not really affiliated with any organization officially, and definitely not with funding. And most of us are queer, most of us are disabled and have pretty significant chronic health issues. And there's a small crew of us who really want to go to DC and are trying to find options. The rally bus really isn't an option for most of us just because of our health. So anyways, we don't know if it would be helpful at this moment to start a Wyoming chapter of the Poor People's Campaign, but we have like a whole series of questions that it would be really great to be able to ask. And I don't want to put all of them out here right now, just because there's a lot of people who might want to ask questions. So my question is,
I
who
would
can
say
we ask all
feel
our
free
questions
to chime in with your questions. I'm sure other people share some of your questions as well.
Okay. Yeah, I guess like as far as like starting officially like a Wyoming, I don't know if it's called chapter of the Poor People's Campaign, like what do we need for that, and would it be advantageous to do that before June 18th, you know, to help us get there, or would it be like significantly more work than our sort of resources would allow? That's kind of one of the first questions.
Excuse me. Julie and Arrow, it's great to see you both. I know a lot of really great folks connected to the Nonviolent Medicaid Army in other states as well. So, you know, we do have state coordinating committees in most states, but not all. And as you all have rightfully identified, not in Wyoming. But I think it'd be great to connect maybe off this call by phone or email, you know, with us. And I think what we'd love to do is maybe just connect you with our field team and get it on their radar. You know, the question of a contingent of folks in Wyoming who are both committed to coming to DC, but also thinking long-term about what it could look like to organize in Wyoming. So our emails are in the chat, but maybe just hit us up offline and we could loop in some folks on our field team and maybe try to start that conversation.
Okay, cool. And I'll just thank you very much. And I can put my email in the chat also. And just to follow up a little bit on that, because this might also be a question for others, is just kind of like, I mean, the biggest thing, I would say our biggest, you know, barrier is just like funding, because we're way out here, and just like poor, and we're all poor, and we're like Arrow and I, we have a lot of organizing experience, and you know, we just don't have the experience with like sort of the infrastructure of fundraising. And I don't know if people are just doing like GoFundMe type of things, or if it's like going through, you know, like Poor People's Campaign for like tax deductible. Yeah, so like, you know, if that's another question to, you know, take offline, then that's fine. But our biggest thing is gathering the funds, and what's the, you know, most efficient way to do that at this like late hour.
I think that's a wonderful question, Julie. It's something that we have discussed as a group of organizers to organize the LGBTQ contingent, is how do we get folks who are poor members of the LGBTQ community the resources that they need to travel and potentially stay in DC in order to actually participate. And I think there are many ways to reach that goal. But yeah, I don't think we have any specific resources to recommend right now. But yeah, maybe why don't we connect you, Arrow, and Tyrone and I, and we can maybe talk about ways to mobilize some resources for a contingent from Wyoming, because I am from Colorado and I know how far Colorado and Wyoming are from DC. And I have taken people to marches in DC from Colorado, and it's quite a drive, and it is quite then a stay in terms of we need to make sure that people are able to probably have a hotel room for the night, because you can't. I have done that drive to DC, done a march and driven back. It's not fun. So I think we'll have to talk about that. So yeah, but I'm gonna also put my email in the chat here, but why don't we follow up, you, Tyrone, and I, and we can talk about some things there. George, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I just was going to let you all know that my church has a long history of doing these types of events in DC, where we host people to stay at our church. And so we get air mattresses. They sleep on the floor. They're not the best accommodation, but hotel rooms can be pretty expensive. So if you know of a group or would like any assistance, then I'm here to help you with that.
Thanks, George. Yeah, why don't you, we also follow up with you, and maybe we can try to connect resources, to people who need them. So thank you. Would anybody else like to chime in with any questions, comments? You can either put them in the chat or yeah, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself, since there's no stat right now.
I just wanted to chime in that, George, the point you raise is it's a good reminder that hotels are not the only way people can and will be sleeping in DC during this weekend. And there are universities with dorms and spaces often open over the summer. When their students aren't there, there are churches and synagogues and mosques. So our folks and team will be likely working with lots of different institutions to try to identify some, but certainly, like you, George, if there are other folks with relationships with spaces like that in DC, it's a really good, cost-effective way of trying to get folks a place to sleep.
Great. I'm gonna read this off from the chat here. So Elena's mentioning that is there a current list of asks from us in terms of just having that specific communication worked out, and what would be the specific parts of that? And I can answer that one. Tyrone and I will be following up after this call with a communication that has a list of resources, including a number of the resources that have been shared today, including the registration page to get a seat through Rally, and to sign up to be a participant in the Moral March, and also more specifically with a sign up to participate in the LGBTQ delegation that will be marching. So we will be in touch with some additional links and resources after this call to all of y'all who have attended today. So I think
Elena,
that is, go ahead, Shelley.
No, sorry, I was just seeing that you're also in terms of our policy asks and demands for June 18th. To be honest, we don't have, so much of our agenda has actually been the same since we launched the campaign, around, changing the poverty measure, around adequate housing, the expansion of healthcare, reducing military spending, kind of these big demands that would actually, require that we implement fair taxation, relieve debts, and start to spend on the things we need and not the things we don't. And so we don't have, our demands haven't kind of been narrowed down at this point to be attached to any specific legislation or anything like that. Really, much of the focus for June is for us to kind of get a sense of our power again as a broad and growing community of people that that is ready to join together and push our elected officials and this political environment to do more than it's been willing to do, not just for the past couple of years or a couple of administrations, but for the past 40 years and more. It could be that by June we have a more specific kind of tailored list of policy demands, although they won't. If we do, they're not going to be all that different than what we've been pushing for a long time, which is, Tyrone and NCLR has done, and many of you have done the work on, show that LGBTQ folks, need and would, need much, disproportionately than other members of the population. And so I think, I don't know if that answers your question kind of specifically. There is, but one thing I wanted to add also is because of because of the nature of who's affected by these injustices and also what we're pushing for, we can kind of see the LGBTQ leadership across the breadth of this campaign, at the national level, at our state level, in our religious and clergy sectors, in our partnerships, in our cultural leaders. It's in our media work. It's just really profound to see where, who all is stepping up to be a part of this campaign in all these different ways and bringing talents and skills and resources to the table. And it's no surprise to see the depth of LGBTQ leadership across the campaign. So I just wanted to put that out as well. I don't think we sometimes recognize that enough, and we should. And so just wanted to let you all know that, because it sounds to me like we're going to have a pretty amazing delegation from this network in June, and we're going to be in very good company.
Thanks, Shelley. Tyrone, did you have anything to tail on that? Okay. All right, Alex. Yeah.
Hey y'all. Hey Spencer, good to see your face. I'm Alex Sheldon, pronouns are they, them, and I head up the research and social impact departments at Daylight, which is a neobank for LGBTQ people. I also used to work at the Movement Advancement Project, and I actually made that local non-discrimination map, so I love to see it coming back into play. So really great to be here. I have a question about whether or not you all, I think that Daylight can definitely be sharing this with our users and app of all LGBTQ people of varying income levels. And also would love to be sharing it on our social media and be pushing out. We may even be able to get a staff contingent there. But when it comes to, and I have no idea what our budget will look like at this time for charitable giving, but are you all interested in sponsorships for this? Or would you be more interested in something that would look a little bit more like mutual aid to get people there? What looks best to you all? And of course, I can't make any promises because we are a very early stage startup, but would love to be able to consider some of those options.
That's awesome. Alex, first that you made that map, I've looked at that map 1,000 times in the last year. So cool. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, it's a great question in terms of resources. There aren't corporate sponsors for the day itself. But I do think, whether it's, donations to the Poor People's Campaign or a conversation, for instance, with Tyrone and Spencer about supporting a fund, for instance, for LGBTQ leaders to get to DC, I think there is a lot of room, in terms of charitable giving or kind of mutual aid resourcing for folks to get to DC, which is, I think, the primary priority right now. So it's a generous offer if and when that makes sense for you all, and perhaps truly it might make the most sense for you to put your head together with Spencer and Tyrone and others to think about what a fund could look like to sponsor, this community and your members to get to DC. So appreciate the question and putting that out there.
Yeah, Alex, why don't you follow up with me and we can put some time together with Tyrone.
Sounds good. I'll also drop my email in there. Tyrone, I don't think we've met before. I'm dropping my email in there, but I'll follow up with y'all. Thanks.
All right, so I saw one question in the chat that has been sort of on the stack here. Do we have advice or information about how there will be assistance for folks who need ADA compliance and perhaps some mobility assistance for folks who are mobility limited or seniors? Shelley, I think that's part of a discussion that we've had previously, but also, that maybe you guys have the most information about.
Yeah, it's a great question, and Julia and Sarah, I think, have sort of rightfully pointed out that the organizer manual that we have up online is probably not actually sufficient to answer all of those right questions. I think the plan for the day will likely be a meaningful but probably short march, of any, if any, kind of real sort of movement of people. And then, in some ways, for the bulk of the day, if you're envisioning previous kind of large mobilizations in the style of March for Our Lives, or Women's March, in terms of really taking over blocks of streets and having, a large program. So I think much of it will be accessible and stationary for folks. And because it's on Pennsylvania Ave, there'll also be lots of entry and exit points for people at various intersections. And so I think there's more probably to say and work on in terms of the details of accessibility, of moving, making sure folks are able to get to and from the location. I mean, we've worked with shuttles, in the past. We've worked with companies that supply assistance, whether it's wheelchairs or others. So I mean, I think that all of those pieces are likely on the table, and we just need to get back with our team, who's kind of running point on the day of preparations. But I think the expectation will be that the bulk of the day will be likely fairly stationary and hopefully in that way accessible to as many people as possible. Also, I should say permitted. So none of this is, all of it is like legally compliant and above board in conversation with like local authority in DC. And so it also means that we will have reserved space ahead of time, and that we'll know where people can and can't be.
And there will be, water stations and other things like this as well that will be, at least we've done that before. But yeah, so there's a lot of different kind of moving parts that are still coming into focus. But these questions also help clarify, what we should be kind of planning around. So I appreciate everyone's questions.
And I echo that, because that will also help Tyrone and I in terms of thinking about what resources we might want to bring on site for the day to support people's needs, including food, drink, and maybe some folks who are volunteers to help those who might need assistance to participate in the march, et cetera, et cetera. Heidi, yeah, you've been on the stack for a while.
Yes, sorry, I'm actually in a car, so I'm going to stay off camera. But thank you once again for doing this. Tyrone, great work, and always great to see you, my friend, and nice to meet others on the call. Just count me in as support, and Tyrone knows I will do everything I can. I just thinking two things came up. I think it is really important to kind of have these conversations around accessibility and just understanding some of the limitations that we might still be under in terms of with COVID as the things spike up. So just being mindful of that. And then also just leveraging our own networks. We're talking about food and drinks and things on day of. I think, the LGBTQ leaders in DC know enough people that own restaurants and other things to try to leverage donations for water and other snacks on the day up. So I want us to just keep thinking about who we need to call, Tyrone, for those things. And then additionally, I just wanted to just press a little bit on the policy ask as they come into focus, just understanding that there is national and local conversations where, LGBTQ issues, especially people, are just under attack right now, and understanding that the Poor People's Campaign actually focuses on very specific things like you brought up, Shelly. I do want us to be slightly more intentional and leaning towards the LGBTQ lens, because there are some unique things happening in our community. And if there's ways to marry that and have that align with your policy asks, I think that would be really impactful. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Heidi. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Heidi. Yeah, are there any thoughts, Noam, Shali, Tyrone?
I'm happy to. Tyrone, was there anything you wanted to say? Yeah, no, those were all awesome points, I thought. I also saw Emma's question in the comments about police presence. I mean, I can't say for certain. I'm not in, Shelley and I aren't on the ground in conversation necessarily at that level, but it will be a permanent, just to say it will be a permanent event. So that does mean that there will likely be some police presence. It's also worth noting, as probably many folks on this call know, Washington, D.C. is perhaps the most policed place in the United States, has more police jurisdictions than any other city in the country. Poor and low-income people bear the brunt of police violence, of state-led violence, and LGBTQ folks and poor LGBTQ folks, disproportionately. So I think that this has always been very front of mind for the work of the Poor People's Campaign over the years. And when it's necessary for a mobilization of this kind that needs to have, permits and all the rest, so that's on our minds. And yeah, I think we expect we'll have our own marshals and peacekeepers, and folks who are well experienced with de-escalation, and folks who are directly responsible for being in conversation with any police that are present. So, I will say that's something that the Poor People's Campaign is quite experienced at this point. We lead, pretty significant permitted and non-permitted actions over the years. So have lots of different ways of understanding how to relate to and be, in conversation with police when we need to be. So just wanted to raise that. And Heidi, love your point about being in contact with local folks in DC in terms of resourcing, space. And as Shally, I think, was saying, there will be water stations. It's DC in June, so it's hot. I think, thinking about how we get food to people, and how maybe a contingent here can be also thinking about that would be great, would be really great.
Definitely echo that. Tyrone and I will definitely be thinking about how we can bring water and snacks and things so that folks can get those things if they need them, since of course many people don't think to bring water before they march, but that is one of the most important things. I want to jump on the stack here before I read one of the next questions. Does this include, has there been any discussions with the National Lawyers Guild about having legal observers?
Oh, that's a good question. We definitely have relationships with them and with other folks. We have a legal team that's sort of made up of significant civil rights organizations and other sort of social justice and human rights law organizations around the country. So I think we'll probably be in consultation with them about the best way to be legally prepared on the day. And actually, that was a good reminder that the other thing I wanted to note, based on what Heidi had been saying in terms of COVID safety, is that the Poor People's Campaign has been working since the first weeks of the pandemic with a national public health advisory committee, which is made up of public health experts all across the country. And so when the campaign has gathered in person over the last couple of years, I would say we've often exceeded CDC guidelines in terms of safety. And, I think we are often really moving with an abundance of caution when it comes to mobilizing in person. And so that public health advisory committee is keeping us kind of very closely abreast on the latest kind of science and data and best practices as it comes to these kind of gatherings. And so as we get closer to the date on June 18th, I think we'll also be adjusting anything we need to according to what the conditions, demand.
Thanks, Tom. So we only have 1 minute left here. And I'm gonna read out the last question here that's been put in the chat. Oh no, I lost it. So we talked about disability access and need for accessibility services, resources. I seem to have lost your question, whomever put it in the chat. So if you would like to either put it in
yes.
or sound it out.
I think it was my question about whether the Poor People's Campaign has a table at the Capitol Pride Festival, which is the festival is the Sunday prior to the march. So like that seems like a good time to also do some recruiting, as when someone mentioned recruiting restaurants, that came to mind. But we could recruit other things that too, but just sharing.
And yeah, if anyone, something that was mentioned in the chat earlier, if anybody got this event forwarded to them and is not registered, please, yeah, put your email in the chat so that we can make sure that we follow up with you, and we'll save the chat from today so that we can ensure that we follow up with you. I'm going to put Tyrone and my email in the chat here. So if folks have any questions about the LGBTQ contingent, they can follow up with us there. And are there any final thoughts or questions before we express our gratitude to our wonderful guests today and let them resume the amazing work that they're doing?
I just want to say this call has been really inspiring and uplifting, just to see this community coming together as you all have and will be doing over the next several weeks, but really over the next, I think, phase of wherever we're headed together. So just appreciate all of you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Shally and Noam, for coming in and speaking to us today about this amazing campaign that I am proud that we will now be joining in June. So Tyrone, do you have any last minute thoughts?
No, just want to say thank you to everyone. We'll be following up with emails, and we look forward to coordinating and mobilizing with you and seeing you on June 18th. And yeah, I hope everyone has a good rest of the day, and take care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.